The world of Velyara was a place of wonder. Its skies shimmered with 3 suns, casting colors no human eye could fully describe. Crystal towers rose like mountains made of glass, and rivers flowed with water so pure it reflected the stars even during the day. Birds with feathers like spun light soared above floating gardens, and the air smelled faintly of flowers that glowed in the dark. Yet in all this beauty, there was one figure who felt none of it truly. Queen Seralith, ruler of Velyara, sat alone on her throne in the grand palace. She was tall, elegant, and carried an aura of power that made even the bravest advisors bow deeply. Her skin shimmered faintly in soft gold tones, and her eyes were the deep blue of the oldest oceans. But tonight, as every night, she felt the emptiness that the palace could not fill. The court had dispersed hours ago. Laughter and chatter had faded, leaving only the soft hum of crystal lights and the distant wind through the floating gardens. Seralith looked out over the palace halls, lined with statues of heroes and legends of her ancestors. She had everything a ruler could want: respect, influence, and a legacy that spanned centuries. Yet none of it could replace the warmth of companionship. She had spent decades learning, ruling, and planning. Her people revered her, and she commanded loyalty like no other. Still, the queen was lonely. She had tried friends among her advisors, but most approached her only with duty and fear. Her confidants often whispered but never shared true understanding. There were moments when she had wished for someone who could see her not as a queen, but as Seralith, the being who laughed softly when alone, who dreamed of distant worlds, who sometimes felt fragile despite the crown. Every evening she would retire to her private chambers. The room was vast and elegant, with walls carved from glowing crystal, shelves lined with books from countless galaxies, and windows that opened onto the endless sky. Yet the beauty around her felt hollow without someone to share it with. She would sit by the balcony, watching the twin moons rise, and wonder if anyone, anywhere, could understand the quiet ache in her heart. The palace staff had long grown accustomed to her solitude. Servants moved silently, never lingering longer than necessary. Courtiers spoke in whispers outside the chambers, unsure if they dared disturb the queen. Even the royal advisors, clever and wise, avoided personal conversation, thinking their duty ended at counsel and strategy. For Seralith, the world was full of people, yet she was profoundly alone. She had learned to mask it, to rule with authority and grace, but the loneliness was always there, a quiet shadow at the edge of her vision. Sometimes she would catch herself smiling at memories she could not share, or laughing quietly at a thought she wished she could voice. The halls of the palace, magnificent though they were, echoed with silence. Tonight she rose from her throne and walked toward the balcony. The wind carried the scent of glowing flowers, and the stars above blinked in patterns older than any living memory. Seralith traced her fingers over the carved crystal rail, feeling the smooth edges, and let her mind wander. She remembered a time before she became queen, a time when connection came easily, when friendships were genuine, and when laughter was shared freely. But those days had long passed. Her path had demanded sacrifice. She had chosen power to protect her people, to ensure the safety of her empire. She had learned the language of diplomacy, the strategies of war, and the burdens of leadership. Every decision she made shaped worlds. And yet, every choice had also drawn a line of separation between her and others. A soft chime echoed from within the palace, announcing the hour of reflection, a time reserved for meditation and study. Seralith entered a small chamber beyond the balcony, where ancient texts rested on floating platforms of light. She had read countless stories of rulers who had conquered galaxies, of beings who had changed the course of stars, and of heroes who had faced impossible odds. But these tales, though inspiring, never spoke of the quiet loneliness that power could bring. She opened a tome of philosophy from a distant star system and traced the words with her fingers. They spoke of courage, of wisdom, of balance. She understood each concept fully, yet none of them addressed the simple human desire to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. Even wisdom could not fill a heart yearning for connection. The queen sighed and closed the book. She walked back to the balcony and gazed at the twin moons reflecting on the rivers below. Her mind wandered to thoughts of other worlds. She imagined beings from distant planets, wondering if any felt as isolated as she did. Perhaps there was a world where someone understood solitude, where a voice could reach her without fear or pretense. The night deepened, and the palace grew even quieter. Outside, the gardens glowed in soft blues and purples, the flowers pulsing gently with life. Crystalline birds perched on branches, their tiny hearts beating with light. The queen watched them and wondered if their small lives held joy she had forgotten. She had learned to fill her days with duty and purpose. Yet, as night fell, the emptiness returned. She remembered the stories her ancestors told, of queens and kings who had shared laughter, love, and counsel with companions of their choosing. She wondered why the same could not happen for her. Perhaps it was the weight of her crown, or the fear of vulnerability. Perhaps it was simply the nature of the throne. The palace doors opened softly and a young servant approached, carrying a tray of tea infused with rare spices. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "The night tea is ready." Sarilith smiled faintly, a small gesture that almost went unnoticed. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm, carrying the weight of centuries. The servant placed the tray on a side table, then retreated quietly, leaving her alone once more. She picked up the cup, feeling its warmth seep into her fingers. The aroma was comforting, but it could not replace the warmth of companionship. She sat on the balcony, sipping slowly, her gaze fixed on the stars. In the quiet, she allowed herself a moment of honesty. She admitted, if only to herself, that she longed for someone to step forward. Not a servant, not a courtier, not a subject, but someone who could see her beyond the crown. The night stretched on. Sarilith's mind wandered to possibilities, dreams, and fleeting imaginings. She thought of friends she might have had, of stories she could share, of laughter she could hear. She wondered if the universe held a being brave enough to approach her, not with fear but with understanding, and somewhere, far beyond Vilyara, across the expanse of stars, a human in a distant system was preparing for a journey that would change both their lives. Unaware of the queen's loneliness, unaware of the walls she had built around her heart, this human was about to step forward into a world that seemed perfect yet lacked one thing: connection. Sarilith closed her eyes, leaning against the balcony rail. She allowed herself a small hope, fragile but persistent, that the silence of her nights might one day be broken, that perhaps someday someone would see the queen, not as a ruler but as a being with a heart capable of longing, joy, and friendship. For now, the palace was still. The crystals glowed, the moons shone, and the wind whispered through the floating gardens. And the queen, alone yet not defeated, waited, as she had for countless nights, for the spark of connection that would remind her that even a ruler of worlds could still dream of companionship. Little did she know, that spark was closer than she imagined, and soon, the solitude that had defined her reign would meet something entirely unexpected: a human, brave enough to step forward. The stars above Vilyara twinkled like scattered gems, casting pale light over the floating crystal towers and the shimmering rivers below. It was another peaceful evening, but something unusual was happening beyond the horizon. A small spacecraft, sleek and silver, descended through the atmosphere. Its engines hummed softly, carrying a single occupant, a human named Elias. Elias was tall, with dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes and a curious gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. He had trained for years to travel the galaxy, not as a soldier or conqueror, but as an observer, a diplomat, and a learner. He had read stories of alien civilizations, studied countless languages, and learned the delicate art of communication across worlds. But nothing in his training could fully prepare him for the moment he would first meet a queen. The ship landed gently in the royal docking bay, a massive chamber filled with humming crystals that glowed in response to movement. The royal guards, tall and imposing, approached cautiously, their armor glinting under the light. They were prepared for danger, as any royal guard must be, but Elias raised his hands calmly. "I come in peace," he said, his voice steady but respectful. "I am Elias from Earth. I wish to meet Queen Sarilith." The guards exchanged cautious glances. They were trained to detect lies, deception, and threats, and nothing in his demeanor suggested danger. Still, a human approaching the queen directly was unusual. Most visitors would not dare step forward with honesty, but Elias carried no fear. "You may proceed," one guard finally said, nodding. "Follow me." Elias walked down the crystal corridor, his steps echoing softly against the smooth floors. He passed towering statues of legendary rulers and ancient heroes. Each figure seemed to watch him as he moved, reminding him of the history and power of this place. He felt a sense of awe but also determination. He had a purpose: to connect, to learn, and perhaps to understand the queen who ruled this luminous world. Finally, he entered the grand audience hall, a vast chamber that seemed to float above the city itself. Light poured through walls made entirely of crystal, and the ceiling reflected the night sky as if the stars themselves had come down to witness the meeting. At the center of the hall sat Queen Sarilith, regal and imposing yet serene. Her golden skin glimmered faintly, and her deep blue eyes held centuries of wisdom. The queen regarded Elias silently. It was rare for her to see a human, and rarer still for someone to approach her with courage instead of fear. She studied him, noting the honesty in his stance, the calmness in his voice, and the light of curiosity in his eyes. "You are human?" she asked, her voice smooth but carrying a hint of surprise. "Yes, Your Majesty," Elias replied. "I have traveled far to learn from your people, to share knowledge and perhaps to understand your world better." Sarilith's lips curved slightly in a faint smile. Most visitors came with arrogance, expecting to impress, bribe, or plead for favor. Elias did none of these. He approached with respect and openness. That alone was unusual, and in some way it intrigued her. "Very well," she said, gesturing to a platform nearby. "You may speak." Elias bowed lightly and began to speak, carefully choosing his words. He asked questions about Velyara, its people, its customs, and its history. But what truly caught the queen's attention was the way he listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He absorbed every detail, repeating some to show understanding and asking more questions to learn deeper truths. For the first time in many nights, Sarilith felt something stir inside her. It was not fear nor obligation, nor the distant thrill of diplomacy. It was curiosity, a spark that suggested she might finally find someone willing to see her beyond her crown. The court, observing from the shadows, whispered among themselves. "A human," one advisor murmured. "Does he not know his place?" "He is bold," another said, frowning. "Too bold. Yet there is honesty in his eyes." Sarilith ignored their murmurs. She had grown accustomed to the court's opinions, which often focused on protocol rather than reality. She was interested in Elias not because of what he could offer politically, but because of something deeper, something she had not felt in many years, recognition of her as a being, not merely a ruler. Over the following days, Elias moved carefully through Velyara, escorted at times, but often left to explore under the watchful eyes of the queen's aides. He marveled at the floating gardens, the crystal rivers, and the creatures that glided through the skies. But what fascinated him most was not the beauty of the world. It was the queen herself. He noticed the subtle ways she carried herself when alone, the quiet gestures that revealed her inner thoughts, the fleeting expressions that vanished the moment an advisor entered the room. He began to understand that Sarilith's power was matched by her solitude, and that her loneliness was not weakness, but a consequence of centuries of responsibility. One evening, Elias was invited to the queen's private chambers, a space few outsiders had ever entered. The walls shimmered with glowing crystal, and the ceiling reflected the night sky in intricate patterns. Books floated gently around the room, each holding stories and knowledge from across the galaxy. Sarilith entered quietly, her presence commanding yet strangely vulnerable in the intimacy of her private space. She observed Elias as he examined the books, noting his genuine interest and his lack of pretense. "You are not like the others," she said finally. "Most who enter these halls are careful, guarded, afraid of making mistakes. You do not seem afraid." Elias looked up and met her gaze. "I am not here to impress, Your Majesty. I am here to understand. If I am careful or fearful, I cannot truly learn." The queen considered this, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. It was rare to hear such honesty. In her life, people had often hidden behind flattery or strategy. Elias offered none of that. His courage was simple, human, and direct, and that simplicity was disarming. Over the next days, their interactions became more frequent. Elias asked questions about the queen's life, about the choices she had made, and about the world she had built. Sarilith, in turn, shared stories, careful at first, then more openly as trust grew. She spoke of the weight of leadership, the challenges of making decisions that affected millions, and the moments of doubt that no advisor would ever see. Elias listened, genuinely interested, and offered insights not from fear or ambition, but from his human perspective. He spoke of resilience, curiosity, and compassion, concepts familiar to her but framed in ways she had never considered. Through these conversations, Saralith began to see herself reflected in a new light. She realized that her loneliness was not a flaw, but a space waiting to be filled by someone willing to step forward. And in Elias, she found someone who dared to approach, not as a subject or observer, but as a companion in understanding. The court, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes. The queen smiled more openly in Elias's presence. Her posture relaxed slightly, and her decisions seemed inspired by something beyond routine strategy. Some murmured their concerns. A human is influencing the queen. But even they could not deny the sincerity of the bond forming before their eyes. One evening, the queen invited Elias to walk with her through the floating gardens. Lighted flowers glowed softly beneath their feet, and crystal birds sang in melodious tones. They spoke of stars, of distant worlds, and of the strange, beautiful things each had seen in their lives. For Saralith, it was a revelation. She had not realized how much she had longed for simple conversation, for curious. Days turned into weeks on Velyara, and the bond between Queen Saralith and Elias grew slowly but steadily. At first, their conversations had been formal, careful, limited by respect and tradition. But over time, the queen began to notice something unusual about this human. He listened in a way that no one in her court had ever listened. He asked questions not to challenge her power, but to understand her. And more importantly, he laughed at moments she had thought too private for anyone to see. One morning, the queen invited Elias to walk through the crystal gardens, a sprawling network of floating terraces filled with glowing flowers and shimmering fountains. The air smelled sweet and alive, carrying scents unfamiliar to the human but soothing all the same. Birds with crystal feathers flitted between the glowing trees, leaving trails of sparkling light as they moved. "Do you like it here?" Saralith asked, her voice lighter than usual. "It's incredible," Elias said, taking careful steps across the floating paths. "I have never seen anything like this. It's like a dream, but alive." The queen smiled faintly. Few humans had ever seen Velyara in this way. Most envoys and visitors were focused on negotiations or records, not on the beauty around them. Elias, however, noticed the small details, the subtle glow of a flower, the way the wind made the crystal leaves hum, the tiny patterns etched into the stone bridges. It was as though he truly saw the world, not just glanced at it. "You notice things others do not," Saralith said. She stopped beside a fountain, watching water ripple in slow, shining waves. "It is strange and refreshing." Elias shrugged, a small smile on his face. "Perhaps it is because I am not expected to know the rules, to follow tradition, or to please anyone. I can simply observe and appreciate." The queen regarded him silently for a moment. There was something freeing in that human perspective, something that made her feel less burdened by her own centuries of expectation. It was as if, for the first time in her life, someone could see her world without being trapped by its rules. Over the following days, Elias was allowed more freedom within the palace. He walked the halls alone at times, exploring archives filled with knowledge from countless worlds. He asked questions about history, strategy, and philosophy, and the queen answered freely, enjoying their dialogue. She even began to share stories of her childhood, memories long buried under the weight of responsibility. "I used to dream of flying through the skies," she admitted one evening. "Not as a ruler, not as a queen, but as myself. I imagined leaving the palace and seeing the galaxy, meeting others like me. Free." Elias listened quietly, then said, "Perhaps it is not too late. You have the power to explore even now, and sometimes having someone to walk beside you makes the journey easier." Saralith looked at him, considering his words. There was truth in them, but she had long built walls around herself. She had learned that vulnerability could be dangerous. Showing emotion could invite manipulation or harm, and yet she felt drawn to Elias's honesty, to the human courage that dared to cross the boundaries most others feared. One day, the queen decided to take a bold step. She invited Elias to join her in a ride through the floating forests, a place so high above the ground that clouds swirled below their feet. Saralith used her personal flying harness, a device that allowed her to move through the air with effortless grace. She expected him to hesitate, but Elias climbed aboard without fear. "You trust me?" she asked, glancing at him as the harness lifted off. I trust that you will not let me fall, he replied, smiling. Besides, I trust you enough to want to see the world from your perspective. As they soared through the forests, the queen felt a thrill she had not experienced in decades. The wind whipped past her face carrying the scent of glowing flowers, and the rivers below glimmered like molten crystal. She had always known this world as a ruler, as a queen in control. But now she saw it through Elias's eyes. Everything seemed brighter, more alive. You see it differently, she said, laughing softly. You notice the small wonders, the things that are easy to miss. That is what humans do, Elias replied. We have less time, less power, and fewer expectations. We are forced to notice the simple, important things. The queen realized he was right. She had spent centuries focusing on grand strategy, on laws, on the empire itself. In doing so, she had neglected the small joys, the moments of beauty that existed simply to be experienced. And in Elias's presence, she began to notice them again. Their days became filled with shared experiences. They explored floating marketplaces where vendors sold glowing fruit and rare metals, visited libraries with scrolls from distant galaxies, and even attended council meetings together, though Elias mostly observed, asking thoughtful questions that challenged old ways of thinking. The court watched with mixed feelings. Some admired the bond forming, recognizing that the queen seemed more alive, more vibrant. Others whispered their concerns, fearing that a human was influencing the ruler in ways they did not understand. Yet Sarilith ignored the whispers. She had found something rare, someone who could see her fully, who respected her strength while acknowledging her humanity. One evening, as they walked through a crystal archway lit by bioluminescent vines, Sarilith paused. Elias, she said, her voice softer than usual, you have changed the way I see things. I did not realize how much I had closed myself off, how long I had gone without sharing even a thought with anyone. Elias looked at her, his expression earnest. You are not alone, Your Majesty. You have strength, wisdom, and beauty that are rare, yes, but you also have the right to be understood, to be seen as yourself. That is not weakness, it is courage. Sarilith felt a warmth in her chest. For centuries she had equated vulnerability with danger, but here, in Elias' presence, she began to understand that vulnerability could also be strength. Sharing her thoughts, her fears, her dreams, it did not diminish her power. It enriched it. They continued their walks and conversations, learning from each other. Elias shared stories of humans, of their resilience, their creativity, and their willingness to face the unknown. Sarilith shared lessons from ruling an empire, the weight of decisions and the quiet victories that often went unseen. Together, they explored not only Velyara but the ideas that connected their worlds: trust, courage, and the power of understanding. One afternoon, as they rested on a terrace overlooking a river of liquid light, Elias turned to her. I have seen many leaders, many rulers in my travels, he said. Most are surrounded by advisors and courtiers, yet they are lonely. They have power but not connection. You are different. You have the chance to be both strong and open, to lead with wisdom and heart. Sarilith considered this, her eyes reflecting the flowing light below. It is not easy, she admitted. I have built walls around myself. Trust is dangerous, and yet I feel something with you that I have not felt in centuries. I am learning that the world is not only about duty or strategy, it is also about connection. Elias nodded. Humans believe that even in the darkest times, connection is what gives life meaning. You have power, yes, but it is your willingness to be understood that makes you truly great. For the first time in her reign, the queen allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, where she could share her thoughts, her dreams, and even her fears with someone who understood. It was a frightening thought, yet exhilarating at the same time. By the end of the day, as the twin moons rose over the horizon, Sarilith realized that something profound was happening. The walls she had built around herself, the protective layers of solitude and distance were beginning to soften. Elias's presence, his honesty, and his courage were teaching her that connection was not weakness. It was a source of strength. And so, on that quiet terrace overlooking Velyara's glowing rivers, the queen began to feel hope. Hope that her nights of loneliness might one day end. Hope that someone from another world could step forward and share not only her world, but her heart. The future was uncertain, as all futures are. Threats might rise, challenges might appear, and the court might resist. But for now, Sarilith felt something she had long forgotten. The thrill of discovery, not of lands or empires, but of friendship, understanding, and the courage to open her heart. And in that moment, floating above the glowing rivers of Velyara, Queen Sarilith and Elias took the first steps toward a bond that could change both their worlds forever. The peace of Velyara had lasted for centuries, but the galaxy is never truly quiet. Beyond the shimmering skies and floating gardens, other empires watched and waited. Some envied Velyara's beauty, some feared its power, and some saw opportunity in the Queen's solitude. For centuries, Queen Sarilith had faced threats with calm precision, yet she had never faced one quite like this. One morning, as the suns cast their first golden light over the crystal towers, the palace's strategic council gathered in urgency. Holographic maps floated above a circular table, showing the positions of distant fleets. A neighboring empire, the Kraith, had begun a slow but deliberate movement toward Velyara's borders. Their ships were armed with weapons unfamiliar to even the Queen's most advanced engineers, and their intentions were unclear, but their approach was unmistakably hostile. The council turned to Sarilith, their faces a mix of concern and anxiety. "Your Majesty, the Kraith are advancing," one advisor said. "We must prepare defenses and mobilize the fleet immediately. There is no time for distractions." Sarilith remained calm, her eyes focused on the holographic display. "I understand," she said. Yet her thoughts were not solely on strategy. Elias had been observing quietly, his human perspective shining through even in this tense moment. He stepped forward, his calm demeanor standing in contrast to the anxious council. "Your Majesty," Elias began, "I have seen human strategies used in situations like this. Perhaps we can combine them with your people's technology and knowledge. Sometimes the unexpected approach is the strongest," the council murmured uneasily. A human offering military advice was unusual, even daring. Yet Sarilith regarded him with interest. She had learned to value his insight and honesty. His courage to speak, even when others doubted him, reminded her of something she had long forgotten. Strength comes not only from power, but from creative thinking and trust. "Very well," she said. "Present your approach." Elias explained a plan that drew from human history and human ingenuity. It was not based on overwhelming force, but on adaptability, careful observation, and using the environment to their advantage. He suggested diversions, coordinated strikes, and ways to protect civilians while the fleet engaged the enemy. The council was skeptical, but Sarilith listened carefully, weighing the risks and benefits. "Your ideas are unconventional," one advisor said, "but they may have merit." Sarilith nodded. "We will combine our strengths. We will not rely on tradition alone." The next days were a whirlwind of preparation. The palace buzzed with activity as fleets mobilized. Crystal cannons were aligned along strategic points, and communication networks connected cities across the empire. Amid the tension, Elias and Sarilith spent hours together, discussing plans, testing strategies, and ensuring every decision was informed by both human creativity and Velyaran precision. During this time, the Queen noticed something remarkable. Elias's presence calmed not only her but the people around her. His confidence and curiosity inspired others to think beyond routine, to explore possibilities rather than fear change. Slowly, she realized that leadership was not just about issuing orders. It was about fostering trust, encouraging ingenuity, and valuing perspectives beyond her own. As the enemy fleet drew closer, Velyara's skies darkened with the silhouettes of Kraith ships. Their weapons glinted ominously, and their formation suggested both skill and menace. The palace prepared for battle, yet Sarilith felt a quiet confidence. Not because she had unlimited power, but because she had someone at her side willing to think differently, to challenge assumptions, and to see solutions where others saw only danger. The first confrontation came as the Kraith fleet approached the outer orbital defenses. Their ships moved with precision, intending to disable Velyara's shields and create chaos. Sarilith and Elias watched from the command chamber, their eyes scanning the battle in real time. "Wait for my signal," Sarilith said. Her voice was calm but resolute. She had trained for centuries for moments like this, yet the stakes felt higher because the people depended on her, not just for protection, but for hope. Elias observed the enemy maneuvers, noting patterns and inconsistencies. "They are predictable in some ways," he said, If we can anticipate their movements, we can use it against them. The queen considered his words, then nodded. Initiate the diversion. Velyara's fleet moved swiftly, using cloaked ships and hidden energy channels to flank the enemy. At the same time, Elias coordinated smaller attacks that drew the Kraith away from vulnerable cities. His human perspective, combined with Saralith's experience, created a strategy that the enemy did not expect. Explosions lit up the skies as ships clashed, yet the Velyaran forces held their positions. Citizens watched from safe observation points, marveling at the precision and coordination of their leaders. The Kraith, powerful but rigid in their approach, struggled to adapt to the dynamic defense. Hours passed, and the tide of battle shifted. Using a combination of technology, intelligence, and daring maneuvers, Velyara's forces forced the enemy fleet to retreat. The Kraith, realizing their attack had failed, and that their movements were anticipated, disengaged and withdrew toward the edge of the system. The palace erupted in quiet celebration. Saralith allowed herself a small smile, proud not only of the victory but of the lessons learned. She had faced danger before, yet this time, she had not relied solely on her own experience. She had embraced collaboration, trusting a human to offer insight where centuries of tradition had fallen short. Later, as the suns set over the palace towers, Saralith invited Elias to the balcony. The wind carried the scent of glowing flowers, and the rivers below shimmered with reflected light. "You were remarkable today," she said softly. "Your perspective, your courage." "It made a difference," Elias shook his head. "I only offered ideas. You executed them. Your people followed you because they trust you. The victory is yours." The queen looked at him, her eyes reflecting both admiration and something deeper, something she had long kept hidden. "No," she said. "This victory is ours because we trusted each other, because we were willing to act together, even when the path was uncertain." Elias smiled, understanding the weight of her words. For centuries, Saralith had ruled with unmatched wisdom and skill, yet she had rarely allowed herself to rely fully on another. That had changed, and in doing so, she had discovered a new strength, one that came from connection, collaboration, and trust. The council watched them silently, some still wary, others beginning to understand. Leadership was evolving, and the queen's openness to new ideas, human ideas, was proving that even the greatest empires could grow stronger through cooperation. That night, as Saralith returned to her private chambers, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The threat had passed, but more importantly, she had learned something vital. Solitude, while necessary at times, need not define her reign. Connection, courage, and the willingness to see the world differently could be just as powerful as the strongest weapons. Elias remained at her side, not as a courtier or advisor, but as a companion in understanding. Together they had faced danger and emerged stronger, their bond tested by circumstance and proven through action. The queen realized that she had found something rare, a partnership that transcended worlds, a connection that honored both her strength and her humanity. As the twin moons rose over Velyara, Saralith gazed at the stars, reflecting on the lessons of the day. She had faced a threat that could have destroyed her empire. Yet she had discovered that leadership was not only about command, it was about courage, trust, and seeing potential where others see only risk. And somewhere, in the quiet of the palace gardens, she allowed herself a small hope that the days ahead would bring not only challenges but moments of shared discovery, of laughter, and of connection that could sustain her through the burdens of rule. The battle with the Kraith had ended, and peace returned to Velyara. The skies glimmered with the soft light of twin moons, reflecting on the rivers and crystal towers. The empire rejoiced, celebrating not only the safety of their world, but also the courage and wisdom of their queen. Yet for Saralith, the most significant change was not the victory. It was something deeper, quieter, and more profound. For centuries, the queen had spent her nights alone, surrounded by beauty, yet untouched by connection. She had ruled with unmatched skill, wisdom, and authority. But her heart had carried a weight that no power could lift. Now, for the first time, she felt that weight begin to ease. Elias, the human who had stepped forward into her world, had brought something far more valuable than knowledge or strategy. He had brought companionship. That morning, Saralith rose, Early walking through the palace halls with a sense of purpose she had not felt in decades. The air was filled with soft light, the crystal walls casting gentle rainbows on the polished floors. Servants moved quietly, aware that something had changed in their queen. She was not only regal and commanding, she was lighter, more present, and more open to the world around her. Elias awaited her in the royal gardens, a place where glowing plants bent gently toward the sun, and rivers of liquid crystal reflected the skies above. He had prepared a small demonstration of human engineering, a model of a solar collector that could store energy efficiently. It was simple, practical yet elegant, reflecting the human focus on solving problems creatively. "You never cease to surprise me," Sarilith said softly, watching him work with meticulous care. Elias looked up and smiled. "And you never cease to inspire me, Your Majesty. The way you see your world, and the way you care for your people. It is extraordinary." The queen felt warmth in her chest at his words. She had grown accustomed to respect, flattery, and formal acknowledgement. But this, the genuine recognition of who she was beyond the crown, was new and deeply moving. "Come," she said, gesturing toward a path that led above the gardens. "I want to show you something." They walked together along the floating terraces, where the flowers pulsed gently in response to the soft wind. Crystal birds flew in, arcs above them, leaving trails of light that danced like ribbons in the air. Sarilith paused at a high platform overlooking the city. From this vantage, the empire stretched before them, gleaming and alive. "It is beautiful," Elias said, gazing at the towers, rivers, and gardens. "And yet, it feels even more alive now." Sarilith nodded. "Yes, you have changed my perspective. I see not only the grandeur but the details, the life, the small joys that I had overlooked. And you have reminded me that I am not alone." Elias reached out, gently touching her hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried trust, warmth, and respect. Sarilith felt a rush of emotion she had long kept buried: relief, joy, and the quiet thrill of being understood. For the first time in centuries, the queen allowed herself to smile fully, without restraint. She realized that the solitude she had accepted as her fate was not necessary. The world could be shared, and her heart could find companionship without weakening her rule. Over the following days, Velyara transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. The people noticed their queen's new lightness, her laughter that echoed softly through the halls, and her willingness to listen more openly to advisors and citizens alike. Sarilith led not only with authority, but with empathy, understanding, and shared vision. Elias continued to stand by her side, offering insights, ideas, and friendship. Together they explored new technologies, discussed the future of trade with distant worlds, and shared stories of their lives. The humans' curiosity and courage complemented the queen's wisdom, forming a partnership that inspired all who observed them. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the empire, Sarilith invited Elias to her private chambers, the place where she had spent so many lonely nights. The room shimmered with crystal light, books floating gently around, and soft music playing from unseen sources. "This room has seen centuries of solitude," she said quietly, her voice carrying both humor and tenderness. "Yet tonight, it feels different." Elias smiled, stepping closer. "Because you are not alone." Sarilith nodded. "Yes, because you are here, and because I have learned that sharing life, thoughts, and even dreams does not weaken a ruler. It strengthens her." They spent hours talking, laughing, and reflecting. The queen shared memories she had never told anyone, stories of childhood, adventures, hopes she had once had for distant worlds, and fears she had long buried under duty. Elias listened, not as an outsider but as a companion who truly understood her. For the first time, Sarilith felt completely seen. She had not realized how much she had longed for this kind of connection, not romantic, not political, but simply human. Someone who valued her for who she was, who could stand beside her through both challenges and triumphs. The empire, meanwhile, flourished under this new dynamic. Citizens saw a queen who was both strong and approachable, wise, yet open to new ideas. Diplomats from other worlds remarked on the energy and vitality of Velyara, noting how the queen's openness had strengthened her influence. Allies were inspired, and even former skeptics among the council began to appreciate the value of human perspective. One morning, Sarilith and Elias stood atop the highest tower, overlooking the city as sunlight bathed the crystal streets. Children played below, their laughter echoing like music through the gardens. Birds soared above, their feathers catching the light. "You have changed my life," Sarilith said softly, turning to Elias. "I spent so long thinking I must face the world alone, yet you have shown me that connection is not weakness. It is power in its own way, a strength that can carry an empire, a queen, and a heart." Elias looked at her with admiration. "And you have changed mine," he said. "I came here to learn, to observe, and to understand. Instead, I found friendship, inspiration, and a queen who reminds me that courage and kindness are the greatest strengths of all." They stood together in silence, watching the empire they had both worked to protect and enrich. The world was vast, full of challenges yet alive with possibility. And for the first time, Sarilith no longer faced it alone. As the suns rose, casting warm light over the crystal towers, the queen made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue to rule with wisdom, strength, and courage. But she would also embrace connection, joy, and the human capacity for understanding. She would not close herself off, for she had learned that sharing life with another heart was the truest form of strength. Elias remained at her side, a human from a distant world who had stepped forward when the queen had spent countless nights alone. Together, they explored new ideas, faced new challenges, and discovered the joys of shared experience. Their partnership was unusual, even extraordinary, yet it was real and it inspired everyone who witnessed it. The people of Velyara flourished, feeling the warmth of a queen who was not only powerful but human in her empathy, courageous in her decisions, and open in her heart. And the queen herself found that life, even in a universe of stars and empires, could be filled with companionship, hope, and the quiet joy of being understood. As the twin moons rose once more over the glowing rivers, Sarilith looked at Elias and smiled. "I am no longer alone," she said, her voice carrying both certainty and peace. "And you never will be," he replied. In that moment, the empire of Velyara entered a new era, one defined not only by power, wisdom, and beauty, but by trust, courage,